building and at. Any other changes? Page 3.
I've got one on line 9. We have a reference to the council again, but I think that should be commission. So we'd return to the commission with a site plan.
On line 26, where it says CUP at this time, this, I believe that the second this is an extra, so I would delete that. Then, so it should read, then approval of the CUP at this time would expedite. And on line 32, between the word meeting and that, I would add an and. So it reads, provided for the planning commission meeting, and that he has not taken steps to discuss. Any other comments? Page 4. Page 5. I had one comment on page 5, line 10. It references creating a BMP, and I don't think that that has been defined earlier in the minutes. Corey, can you clarify for me what the BMP is referencing?
Sorry, I'm troubleshooting here. What's the reference before?
So it's just best management practices?
Oh, yeah.
I would, just because the public may not know what that is, I would say that full. And then if you want to short-side it, put it in parentheses. Any other comments on page 5? Page 6. On page 6, line 22, at the very end of that line, it needs to read space because of, add the word of, high visibility. Any other comments? Page 7.
I wondered about the language, let's see. Oh, just when it says landscaping at their headquarters.
Which
Let's see.
line?
Line 28, and have used the style for landscaping at their headquarters are in St. George. I would say located in St. George rather than are.
Chair Hershey had sent in some written comments, and he said that there's a typo here on page 7, line 12. Are you seeing that? Says typos here on page 7, line 12, and issue should be issues. Well, I did notice that one. I'm not sure what the here, if somebody.
Oh, I think he's saying that noise and circulation, oh, just kidding, I don't know, never mind, sorry.
Let me just, I actually had made some revisions to that section as well, so let me just tell you how I would revise that. So starting with line 11, after that first comma, I would have it read, and the freeway, insert the word is to the east. So noise and circulation, and then I would take out aren't an issue and replace that with are not issues at this time, period. Delete the word and, capitalize concerns, and then the rest would stay. Any other comments?
I just wondered about just the phrasing on between line 32 and 33, to which the applicant responded that all of these, that indicating the ATV, motorcycle, and 4x4s would be sold. And I don't know exactly if we want to say including the brands, Honda, or it just doesn't read quite right.
How would you propose changing that line?
I would divide it into 2 sentences. Just Chair Hershey inquired if sales would include ATVs, motorcycles, and 4x4s, period. The applicant responded that all these would be sold, and then say
And maybe
Just say
including,
Including.
including,
I think including is the word that makes most sense there.
including Honda, Suzuki,
Yeah.
BRP,
Yeah.
and one other.
Yep. Okay, Chair Hershey says, same page, line 28. The word have should be has,
The applicant has
Yep.
used.
and remove the R at the end of that line, page 9.
Oh, that was the one that Commissioner
And we already
Helgeson
fixed
just
that.
talked about.
Okay, any other corrections to page 7? Page 8. Page 9. Chair Hershey writes, page 9, line 13, add the word to before the word consider.
Oh, to consider.
Any other comments on page 9?
I have one. On the very end of line 39, so the building code does accept buildings, I think it's, is that accept, A-C-C-E-P-T?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It's either that or exempt buildings, but I didn't
Yeah,
think
it's
that was right
more,
either.
I don't think the building code governs, so,
So
and
does
I don't
it-
even know if it's 200 feet or 100. I thought it was 120. Oh,
So does it
now it's
exempt
200?
buildings?
Okay.
They're exempt from the permitting process, they're not exempt from the building code. So it's
So-
on your honor build.
So accept might
So would
not.
it be exempt?
Exempt?
I think it's accept. It's accepting this. We're doing this except
ACC?
for these. No.
A-C-C-E-P-T?
No, it's, the building code accepts. or
Oh, I see what you're,
It's this except for these.
So that would be exempt? Would it be exempt?
Exclude is
excludes.
a better word.
We can do exclude.
Let's do that. I think that'll read a little better. Thanks.
Anything else on page 9? Page 10, Chair Hershey says, lines 11 and 12, the clause should read, "and let their buildings decline." So change that last bit, "and let the buildings decline" further to simply read, "and let their buildings decline," period. Any other corrections on this page?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, I may have said on lines 38 and 39 that the biggest contributor for the requested change is the shadow, but my intent was that maybe it's just one of the biggest contributors, because I don't want to state that as fact.
Do you want to add then when one of?
Yeah,
the
when
biggest
one of the biggest.
contributors?
Yeah.
I had two minor little things on page 10. On line 10, toward the end, eliminate the comma, so it just reads, his biggest concern is that rather than, instead of that, comma, rather than. And then, same thing on line 35, after two, there's a comma, so instead of, so it should just read, Mr. Snyder expressed the willingness of staff to revisit the issue. Kill that comma.
So, I'm sorry, what was the first one?
Line 10, very right end, there's a comma after that,
Yes. Because rather than seeking one of these options, it's no positive.
his biggest concern is that, comma,
Is that
rather?
the owners would simply-
Yeah, that one
so
actually
that's-
is, that
Is that one
stays.
right?
That one stays.
Okay. All
Because you
right.
could say,
I'll defer to you in that case.
you
then.
could say, rather than seeking one of these options, his biggest concern is that the owners would simply,
Okay,
Would
I
it
think
be
it's a
before
dependent
that?
clause. I think you're right.
so,
all right, I'll go with that then.
Would it
Alright.
be before that, though? His biggest concern is,
so you
Rather
keep, you keep the
than
comma
seeking.
after that. Is, oh yeah, you mean instead of after that?
is like, is.
Okay,
Well,
so
then
rather
if you
than
read it
seeking.
without, it would say, his biggest concern is that the owners would simply decide.
are we okay with lines 10 and 11 reading his biggest concern is that, comma, rather than seeking one of these options? Are we okay leaving it that way? Okay.
Yes.
Anything else on page 10?
No.
Page 11. Chair Hershey writes in that with all, on page 11, line 24, Chair Hershey says, with all due respect, Corey cannot table the matter. I suggest that this line read, quote, if this matter is tabled by the commission with the foregoing directives, comma, Mr. Snyder will conduct further investigations. And then pick up with, and will be doing so with the intent of preserving the option.
I like that.
Could you read the first part to me one more time?
Yes. If this matter is tabled by the commission with the foregoing directives, comma, Mr. Snyder will conduct further investigations, comma. And then it should just pick up where you left off on line 25 with and. Any other comments on page 11? I had one minor comment on line 13. In other places throughout these minutes, we've capitalized code, so I would capitalize the C there just to be consistent. Page 12.
I just
Chair-
had some changes to the last paragraph, discussing the municipal code. So essentially, we are making bulk changes to the municipal code, but it's only the subdivision ordinance that we're bringing to the commission. So I would like this to read, Ms. Romney informed the commission that at an upcoming meeting, she will be bringing suggested edits for the subdivision for approval by the commission in order to make it available online. However, the subdivision ordinance is currently being completely redrafted by a consultant, but these major changes will not be included in these interim amendments. That's what I was trying to get at.
Any other comments on page 12? Chair Hershey writes, page 12, line 18. After the word hearing, add the words is necessary or unnecessary. So that sentence would read, Mr. Snyder suggested a work session to discuss the circumstances in which a public hearing is necessary or unnecessary. No, I don't think that works.
That works.
If we take out is valuable.
Yeah, I'm gonna eliminate valuable.
Yep, that would work.
And I think putting that in also, it might be good to clarify my next statement instead of saying, Commissioner Wright added that some public hearings for administrative decisions seem unnecessary as there is no real way to take public input into consideration. Again, I may have spoken that way, but I don't want it to read that there's no real way to take public input into consideration. Maybe
The expectations of the public.
yeah, maybe it needs to be conveyed that administrative decisions seem unnecessary as public input cannot be taken into consideration for
As part of the decision-making
as part of the
process
decision-making process.
for administrative decision.
Yeah, exactly. Because we do take them into consideration and we do receive some information, but.
Okay, so tell me if this is what you just said then. So that sentence will read, Commissioner Wright added that some public hearings for administrative decisions seem unnecessary, comma, as public input cannot be taken into consideration as part of the administrative decision-making process.
Well, public comment can be taken into consideration. It's more the public clamor, but so.
Let's put clamor in there.
As
Because,
public
so
clamor.
maybe you don't even
Clamor
want
does
to go
have a
there.
specific.
Maybe you could just say
Or we
Commissioner
could
Wright
say because
added
we are
that-
limited in how we can,
Yeah, limited to,
Use public.
use
input.
public input in the
Yeah.
administrative
Decision-making
decision-making process. Limited, so, okay. Just
Very
say,
good.
as we are limited, now I just forgot it.
How about, can I make a
Yes.
suggestion to say, instead of the "as there is no real way," and add, "as the commission is limited in how it can use
Yes.
public input in the decision-making process"?
Perfect. Thank you.
Did you get that?
I did not. Start from the beginning.
Okay, so line 19, taking out the "as there is no real way to take public input into consideration" and replacing that with "as the commission is limited in how it can use public input in the decision-making process." And then I have two just minor tweaks to this. On line 20, we reference the APA. Corey, can you remind me what that is abbreviated for?
It's the American Planning Association, Utah chapter.
I would, again, just spell that one out, because I was not immediately familiar with that.
That could be the Administrative Procedures Act.
Yeah.
That could be.
Don't you get about a daily email from the APA?
I know, I
do.
get them all the time, and those magazines and stuff.
Yeah, the magazine.
And then I just want to make one clarification regarding my statement in line 22. Take out the word "referenced," and I want it to read, "Commissioner Hayman expressed that public hearings can be valuable, comma, and referenced by way of example," and then leave the rest. Anything else on page 12? Page 13. The vice chair.
I'm wondering if we could, I'm sorry, I apologize for my tardiness. I wonder if we could go back to page 3. And there may have, this change may have already been made when I walked in at page 4, so. I just felt like on lines, the last sentence of the second paragraph on lines 11 and 12 felt a little bit redundant. Did we address that at all?
No, how would you propose changing it?
Just take out that this approval only applies if, and just say, so staff recommends approval with the caveat that the fire marshal does not require any changes.
I like that change. Anything else?
Started getting confusing about that, so.
All right, the vice chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for January 11th, 2017 meeting with the changes noted.
I second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. All right, the minutes are approved. So it looks like the public hearing on the Chitos Johnson subdivision has been postponed until the February 8th Planning Commission. So let's move next to the general plan text amendment Southeast Neighborhood Plan that has been scheduled for a public hearing. And we'll turn the time over to staff.
Chair and Commission, maybe just some clarity. I'm not sure. We have a couple from the public. They're welcome to stay through all this, but I'm just not sure which item that they are engaged in, so you might clarify with them. It may be the Cheetos.
Yeah, so for purposes of those that are here from the public, so we had originally noticed two matters to be heard tonight. One was the Chitos Johnson subdivision, and that one has been postponed. Oh, so can you tell me which matter you're here for tonight?
We were with the Centerville Cemetery.
Okay.
Okay.
That's not the,
That's the southeast.
That's the
that's
Southeast.
the southeast. Okay, we just wanted to make sure that you were here for the right thing, because we have two things and one of them has been postponed. So we didn't, okay, good.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll turn the time back over to staff.
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to introduce to you is the concept around writing about the Southeast Neighborhood Plan. The first item is we're addressing this in two parts. So What's before you tonight is discussing the residential areas of that neighborhood plan only. We have commercial areas such as Pages Lane and Main Street to further discuss on a second phase of this project. So just for the record, the clarity that we're reviewing a portion of that neighborhood plan. Second, the viewpoint of the written recommendation. I think from my vantage point, I tried to capture at least the base essence of what I've heard for the past year about amending the plan. Part of that is the pressure of multifamily development, that there's been some angst and reservation about in allowing more of that in this neighborhood area, particularly south, the entire south area. And the second item is probably something that's maybe not on everybody's radar, but I'd like to provide clarity to it by what I perceived was discussed. The issue within this neighborhood of where some RM zoning has historically been. So if we look behind Centerville City Hall in the park, you'll notice there's some residential medium on 100 East, and there's residential medium on the south side of 400 North or Parish Lane. Over a year ago, it is over a year ago, a previous council wanted to reconsider this residential medium zoning in this portion of the neighborhood. The current council in place put a hold or a stop, I'm not sure what the exact term, but they didn't feel that the pressure to review the residential medium zoning at that time was necessary. And maybe at a future date, they could have a discussion. So I think those are some vantage points in the writing of the draft that I wanted you to at least be aware of. The other part of the writing of the draft, and I'll point out to it in some of the discussion, there are some fixes from my mind that still need to take place. We need to debate on how we want to address those matters. But I wrote it as if this is what I perceive the council wanted and what I would perceive findings to support that direction. But I do want to emphasize this is the commission's role in the general planning. This is where, we sit back at what people refer to the 30,000 foot level. Here it might be more of a 15,000 foot level because we're only addressing a portion of the city, but we have those discussions about the future and the expectations. And so there is no intent on my part to have you make a decision tonight, unless you're just really comfortable with everything that is written. I'm still not there yet to think it's solid, and I'll kind of explain that to you as we go along. But just to reiterate, the Southeast Neighborhood Plan is, if you think of the quadrant at Parish and Main, that's where the quadrant system sits. This would be the southeast area, and so it would involve everything east of Main Street and everything south of Parish or 400 North to the city limits, either up in the foothills or to Bountiful. That is the entire southeast area. In reviewing the edits, this is some of Lisa's comments. She makes some good points, and maybe she can chime in as she feels necessary in clarity. I've only advertised for 1280-2, the neighborhood southeast. You do have a paragraph that sits up higher than the neighborhoods, talking about generalities and a map. I don't know where the map exists. So that's something I think right off, even though we're not looking at 12481, there is a reference to a map, and it would be nice to have some neighborhood maps.
It's on page 54. You gotta just go to page 54.
Wherever that is. Wherever that sits in history, there was some map, and it has disappeared off the copies that I can find about the general plan. Typically, that's really reflective of what we call a future land use map. The downside of maps in the future land use is everybody looks at it as guaranteed future zoning. So that's a plus and a minus. Maps are great for illustration and spatial understanding, but you also have a perception that if it's on the map in the future, then I can request it and get it today. So you have this whole timing issue of when does the future get implemented and how aggressive the future gets implemented. But I think that's a comment to talk about as we look at the macro view of this neighborhood. The reason I point that out is if you look at this neighborhood, you have a general description of the neighborhood, and then you have all these little sub-districts that sit inside. And when we start talking about the clarity of the plan and the overlaps, how do we distinguish where the sub and the general kind of cross, and what's that future meaning? So I bring that up. And I'll point it out with the Dual Creek area. It's suggested in here. The largest change to the introduction of the neighborhood is my attempt to capture what I think we're hearing. And so I'm open to any suggestions on how we could do a better job. This sets up why we're doing it, a purpose, justifications. It sets the tone of expectations. And in simple, this paragraph that I'm writing is if we're responding that the southeast neighborhood is an undue pressure or has a significant amount, or even as strong as we don't need any more multifamily development, I'm trying to point out in this description that due to the area's geographic location along commercial corridors, it has been a natural place for multifamily development to occur. But yet we have some strong neighborhoods, and it's this tension between the neighborhoods and these corridors and redevelopment activities that everybody's responding to from this macro level. And most of the response has been fairly negative about redevelopment with any type of intensity. So I'm trying to point out that there's this tension, and the decision of the policy is how do we balance that tension and afford neighborhood protection and at the same time looking to the future. So that's really what that first paragraph is trying to capture, and I think we can talk about ideas and the justification of that policy, or the lack of better terms, likability of that policy. As we get into the residential section now, and this is just the part we're looking at tonight, I introduced a new term and replaced an old term, but I'm not sure that this works really well. The old town site, or the old Centerville, the old town site, the town site, the central core of the city in this particular neighborhood is a value or an asset. And there's a lot of references, and then we have some sub-districts inside of that. The complexity is trying to be simple in introducing terms. The predominant area we call today, called the Dual Creek Historic District. But if you think about some of the boundary descriptions in here, the Dual Creek Historic District doesn't align with the Old Town Plat. For example, 400 East, we actually cross over 400 East and incorporate some of the homes east side of 400 East into the Historic District, even though they're not actually in the Old Town Site Plat areas. So I think this is something of a struggle. Do we want to go back and just say Old Town Site? But at the same time, a lot of it is the historic district. And we're trying to celebrate that and do more with that. So I think that's a struggle with naming and what we're referencing to and the clarity of what we're trying to say. So I think that's some work already off the bat that we ought to have a discussion about. When you go into the Old Town Site area, if you will, loose terms, you have these sub-districts. Centerville Elementary area also falls relatively in those same boundaries, but on a limited scale. The Centerville Elementary area / City Hall, because I do reference City Hall, this is back to what I just mentioned just a few minutes ago, this L-shaped residential medium protecting the interior neighborhood as a buffer to City Hall and Founders Park and the elementary school. And if we're in the Dual Creek district where we predominantly want to be single family and to preserve the historic nature, the question comes into, are the streets the places we want that buffer versus the homes? Example, 400 North or Parish Lane, we do have a lot of duplexes along that road. So maybe the balance and tension between the Dual Creek idea and the duplexes can be achieved. 100 North and 100 East, there's no duplexes along there. They're all single-family homes to my knowledge. There might be one of those accessory apartments that I don't know about. But that's a single-family area, but it's labeled as a residential medium buffer to buffer City Hall from the residential neighborhood. So again, we're back to what balance do we want to achieve? Do we want to put a predominant value on the Dual Creek Historic District and less value on buffering to City Hall? Or do we want to buffer City Hall and allow some of the idea of Dual Creek District to be less of importance there? So I think that's a real tension already within the sub-area of the Dual Creek Historic District. The other thing I do in each little sub-area is try to respect the clarity that the council asked. We do repeat that here is a low density area, here is a low or medium density area, but it was pretty clear to me that the city council wanted to say, but no high density. So I added no high density and most of everything is there. So even though intuitively you could say it's not there, I think the council wants some clarity to it's not there, and we also mean that it's not there. So that's an idea that was, written into it. The Centerville Junior High was a reformat. The courtyard at Pages wasn't developed back when this plan was written. And so I'm trying to revamp that language around the junior high and recognize that there's not a lot of, quote, future development, if you will, around south of the junior high. And again, going back in and striking out those elements of the future planning and then no high density. The other area we kind of skip, those are kind of sub-districts of the Dual Creek, so I hopefully described those tensions. We kind of skipped the Pages Lane area and hit to this extreme south Main Street area, the border or border collie, however I was spelling border in the document.
I think we all circled that on our paper.
Did you?
Yeah.
Extreme south area, if we go back to, let's go back to the map. This is an oddity kind of place. Here's the extreme south area. It's this residential medium. You have our last street, 1200 South, and half of the street is in Centerville, and then the east half of the street sitting in Bountiful. They're served right now by, I think, secondary water in Bountiful. We have some joint agreements on storm drain lines. But if you recall, just maybe a year ago on this corner area that was inside of the city versus outside of the city, this commercial piece, and all these duplexes. This is the extreme south, and it's been currently labeled as residential medium because of the duplexes, or residential low. And that's an interesting call out on the low, and I can have some further discussion because you actually have applications already pending on this internal parcel behind the Episcopal Church. Once we get past that area, we're, back here. We end up with a southeast residential area. And to me, this is trying to go back to the maps here. Can't remember which windows or which one. Where are we at? Here we go. If you look at the southeast area, you can see we're really covering all of this area in its general idea. predominantly single-family, just overwhelmingly single-family. And so when we write in, we're just calling that out as it's a single-family area and high density is not an option. And so I think some labelings of extreme south and southeast, you know, where we draw those lines is kind of an interesting, what are we trying to say with that? I think we get the general idea, but it's the clarity that we're discussing. I think that comes also into play as we think about the other half of the general plan. What is the Pages Lane? How does it relate to these areas? And, you know, is there some shifting that should take place? I think the highlight to understand and the distinction is, remember, the Bowling Engineering Building came in for a rezone for high. It ended up medium, and there was this tension on what the language meant, because he was really a commercial. He's the only commercial area north. And so I think the boundary of Pages works, but we also have to think about corridors being a part of the community identity. And how does a corridor function as a whole versus trying to use it as a border area? So I think those are some tensions that we should look at. So from there, I'm leaving it up to you to banter around, you know, some of these concepts, these tensions, identify at least some elements. I'm assuming that if you want to resolve some of these, you give us some direction, we go back and make some changes and fixes and then come back to you again. So unless you're just somehow extremely happy with the draft.
Corey, I had a question for you. So in the staff report, one thing that you have not touched on is the general plan policy review. And one of the things that we are required to look at under the Utah Code is to regularly review moderate income housing needs and identify strategies to allow opportunities to encourage such housing needs. Correct. And I saw in the staff report that it looks like you had actually asked GIS Division to run an analysis. Mm-hmm. So my question for you is two parts. Is that analysis that we ran, is that sufficient for purposes of this code? And if not, how often do we do this, and when was the last time that we've complied with our obligation to regularly review the moderate income housing?
Yeah, great question. And I stuck to the drafting of the policies in my report. I expand some thought patterns. I think the first thought pattern you hit on the mark. We're looking at a neighborhood plan, but we ought to at least keep some periphery of the general policies that are out there in the main elements and making a cross-check to how we're doing. The moderate income housing plan on an update process, I can tell you that we first adopted in 2002. We updated that moderate income housing plan in 2012. We have not hit our latest report that's supposed to go to the workforce services for 2016. So they're giving us for 2017 to make a report back to them. That's something that is run through the council, and they've just sent notice to several cities. It's a good thing it just wasn't Centerville not reporting, to take 2017 and come back with some of the survey questions and answers about moderate income housing and what you're trying to do. The 2012 in a macro view, the minimum is to look at 80% of the median income. So what's the 80% of the metropolitan statistical area? So we're in the Ogden, Salt Lake metro area, so we use those numbers. The 2012, and this is the weakness of trying to figure out where you're at. The 2012 took the county valuations. That's a good and that's a negative, because we know the county valuations are data rich, but may not be market reflection. So that's the precision discussion about data. You know, how precise are you? It's justifiable to use the county evaluations, but it may not be all reflective of reality on the ground. That 2012 evaluation says that we are okay, if you will, at a market number of units for the 80% of median income. That was the target place. of the moderate income housing plan and the suggested target place. There are also provisions in state law to look at those at 50% or lower. So you should keep cognizant that even though you might hit an 80% level, look at your populations that are dropping far below that. And we would be short if we went to the 50% level of moderate income housing in the city, if you went to that level. So I think that's the macro view, is this tug and pull of the data that's available and how it relates to your housing stock, and then what target level you're trying to assess it at. What the state law is not doing is saying that you're forced into providing it. It just wants you to make analysis and try to plan for the future of it. Look at your regulations, look at your zoning, look at your costs. Do some of these create some problems for that housing type, for opportunity for that housing type to occur? In addition to that, looking at your regulations, looking at housing costs, income levels of your population, we also selected a strategy that was coming out of Wasatch Front Regional Council planning tools, was look at open market yields. What's the yield of an open market? And they provided a 2007 numeric that was adopted into our moderate income housing plan. And they said, what would be an open market yield versus what's your city? And so my presentation must be really exciting. So the open market yield was one tool for us to at least take a look at. And that was the policy goal of the moderate income housing plan. So showing you how we would look at those numbers, just grabbed that southeast area and said, what is the housing counts and so forth compared to an open market yield? And we provided you some data. The data is neither good or bad, whether you're in an open market yield or not, but it is kind of the gauging on which direction you're heading. Are you so predominant in single-family housing, you probably ought to look at your regulations on multifamily and see, what are we doing that could be better or so forth. What staff tries to argue is that there seems to be citywide and in this neighborhood a shortage of multifamily. That's different than the duplex and the townhomes that are side by side and often sold. The multifamily is really a category of trying to get towards rents and an option for some housing of rents and so forth rather than just for sale housing. And we seem to fall behind in that realm, in the multifamily housing. And so what I point out to is the southeast area is short. City itself is short. So keep that in mind if we have some shortages and we're setting a policy that says single-family neighborhood with the pressures of the commercial corridors need to be afforded protection, then we also have to think about that if we make that broad policy planning decision and we go with the crafting of no high density, it's likely that multifamily will be short in the city in this portion of the neighborhood. So should we be looking somewhere else in the future, in other parts of the city? We've looked somewhere else, somewhat in the other parts of the city. The West Centerville neighborhood plan is a major area we have looked at. I also bring up the concept that we're only halfway through this neighborhood planning process. So we might want to protect our residential areas, but we might want to look at the commercial areas and redevelopment opportunities and not necessarily say in the commercial areas we're being more restrictive than the neighborhood areas. So ultimately I came to a comfort level that our neighborhood areas are fairly strong. They should be afforded some protection, but there might be peripheries inside this neighborhood along commercial corridor still to look at those options as we think about the other half of the plan, or understand that if we come strong for this area about multifamily, we need to at least evaluate what we're doing in other parts of the city. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you, Corey. Does anyone have questions for staff?
Yeah, Corey, could you talk to me about this draft that we have for section 12480-2 and essentially how were these edits? How did we come to these edits? Is this something that you've just done through your
Yeah,
analysis?
this is what,
Interpreting-
yeah, this was my gleaning the base of what I've heard through time. And there is a strong element of Dual Creek being celebrated and preserving that Dual Creek Historic District. There has been a concern about the south area as a whole, not just the southeast plan, but the south area as a whole has received a burden of multifamily type housing. This is the Hafoka property, the Porter Walton townhomes. This, in my mind, is the Main Street plan. When we re-looked at densities on the Main Street plan, the O'Brien Glass and Pitt site and the controversy that was associated with that's that site.
Okay.
These were places of multifamily within this neighborhood that has created some conflicts. And so I tried to write it because that was the direction I felt from the city council was, this is the kind of edits that we want. So I tried to interpret the edits that they wanted. This is not coming from the council. It's my interpretation of what I'm hearing. But I'm also, as a planner, trying to point out with the other elements of the plan that there's also these balances, and then hoping to engage you discussion on how we achieve that.
So on the end of the paragraph, that first big edit you made on section 12, or suggested edit on 1248-2, where it starts with furthermore, you get to the bottom of that and it discusses let's see, it talks about how, while in this area, this particular neighborhood, it's time to peel back on multifamily housing, but we will encourage higher density housing in other less concentrated locations in the city and or region. Can you think of what those other ones would be and how they're being encouraged off the top of your head?
Well, this one's just saying that it's the idea of this plan is going to have more of a protectionist view of density, and I'm trying to. The purpose of the statement is trying to make a policy that says we're not, just because we're doing this more of a protectionist view of this southeast area, we're not saying that it translate to citywide policy. So, because one of the things I have as a professional planner is, you know, the modern income housing plan requires us to keep tabs and monitor on the housing. We can't circumvent that. And a strong state element of that is to look at your regulatory authority of zoning and don't use that to discourage housing. So I'm trying to say, although we have a protectionist view of the south area, we're not translating that broadwise of the city. We want to look at other areas of the city. And that way we don't get caught into the trap that somebody can point out to that all of your policies are against housing types, and then we have to respond
You
to
can
that.
point to this line and say, hey, look, we've talked about encouraging it elsewhere.
Yes. That's the purpose of that line, is to alleviate the heat that this is a protectionist policy
Or
for the entire city.
Exclusionary, is that what you mean by protectionist?
Yeah, that's another word that's a little bit more strong and aggressive, but
Sorry, I just was trying to understand what you meant by
Yeah.
protectionist.
yeah.
I actually had circled that as well, because it struck me as, I mean, there could be two different policy considerations when it comes to multifamily housing, right? One is to try to push it into less concentrated areas, which, I mean, I've definitely heard people say, hey, why are we on the southeast side? Why do we have the proportion, the greater proportion of multifamily housing, and the north side, for instance, doesn't have very much? But so that this sentence to me reads less concentrated, i.e. pushing it more to the north end, whereas another policy could be, you know what, we're going to protect the north and we're going to protect the southeast, and you know where we really are going to put all of our multifamily housing is on that southwest side, right? And we're just going to pack it in over there. And I don't know that that's necessarily a wrong policy consideration, but it's certainly that this language that you've drafted would not support that second approach. So if the concern is that we are going to encourage higher density housing development on that southwest side, then we would want to say use different language, I think.
Yeah, the
there.
issue that we're struggling is the southwest side is the next plan in queue. So right now, I'm not calling out that southwest side. I'm just saying other parts, because it could be north. It could be the southwest if we revisit it, could not be. It seems to be more contentious to be on the southwest. It could be the west side still. I don't know yet where we want to say this is going to be pushed. I'm just concerned that if you come out with strength of no high density, this area of the neighborhood, and you compare it to our moderate income housing plan, we have to deal with reality that we have to look at other locations.
Can I also ask you too about the in other parts of the city and or region? Because I read that statement as saying, well, we can either try to distribute multifamily housing in other locations in our city, or we can just be very protectionist and say, you know what, you can just take your multifamily housing and move it out to the surrounding cities, and we're just gonna keep ours here.
And I'm probably going to speak and get in trouble for this, because I tend to do that. There is, earlier in the general plan, there is a statement that says we don't feel we need to provide a cross-section of housing. And that statement makes me completely uncomfortable. But I also hear that there is a feeling in Centerville that we can't provide housing for everybody, so we need to center back to what we're willing to do because we can't do it for everything. And so the concept of saying and/or region is a weak way, acknowledge, of trying to say we may get to the point in our future planning that enough is enough. And we don't feel the burden, given the size of our community, the types of land uses, to go beyond this route. So it's a weak way of saying there's a potential that at some point in time, the region's just going to have to look at it in other parts of the region. We have a high demand and strength here. Multifamily is extremely marketable right now in the South Davis area. You're going to see more of it already coming in applications in the short future. So it's just a still strong level of multifamily, and it's a market demand. And so that's the danger of making a policy only on an open market, because that open market could unfairly burden an area. And the stark reality is, when you have a townhome in the Hafoka or the Porter Walton townhomes, the end unit's selling for $311,000. Are we ever really right now in the market going to hit affordable rents and affordable prices? We have to kind of remember that we can look at our regulations, but there's still the market that drives it. And if the market is a high price market, which right now we remain in, the likelihood of getting 80% or even lower is going to be difficult unless you move to a subsidized program. And that's a whole other animal to have a discussion about.
On the flip side of that, I agree with you. We do need to protect against market, but if we are legislating against market, what are we doing for the health of our city in that regard? So if we are legislating right now and pushing back against, again, I'm not saying that we should just let the market determine what our city looks like. This is the whole point of what we're talking about. But if we legislate against market, what does that mean to the health and vitality of our housing market, of what our city looks like? And then how do those concerns play into gentrification of our city, or stale housing prices, or whatever those issues may be? How are we affecting those based on that decision?
Yeah, right along that line, the lines of those comments, Becky, I swear I've mentioned strong towns like 15 times on this commission, but as I think of the continued attempts to what I see as exclusionary zoning, meaning keep multifamily out, we've had enough. We've had our share, not in my backyard, maybe in another city in the region, but not in Centerville. Strong Towns has some awesome analysis on how that hurts the financial sustainability of the city. The tax revenues from single-family housing just don't match up with the cost to maintain those infrastructures. So you just got to find other ways to pay for that. And because of that, I have a hard time finding edits here and there in this particular, in the suggested changes you have, because I kind of disagree with the general premise that it's going. And granted, I'm not subject to the democratic pressures of the county and the reasons why they were and weren't, or why they were elected, but I just think from the sense of just not talking about healthy development, but just financial stability for the city alone gives me a serious hesitation on these amendments.
Well, and continuing this discussion, I was obviously pretty involved in some citizen, with my last run for city council, was very involved in citizen opinions and what was happening with high density. From my time interviewing people, talking with people, and campaigning, I agree with Corey that there is a very, very strong sentiment in Centerville against high density. And I feel comfortable moving in a direction that says, okay, we don't want high density, but let's think about what is high density and how is that defined. That the Balling Engineering property, for instance, came before, had a high density, and was able to have almost the exact same plan by purchasing 1 foot or a few feet from the LDS church.
It's like 10 feet, wasn't it?
10 feet.
10 feet.
10 feet.
10, I mean, like 1 foot depth and maybe,
Well, 10
Yeah.
feet.
yeah. So the difference, and I agree that the citizens were nervous about high density, and I think the term high density is important to discuss and make sure. I think calling it out right in here, it's okay for me to say to citizens and to say in our plan, we don't want high density. Does this make you feel better? Because this is not the plan. But I don't love the idea of limiting medium density, because a lot of citizens are okay with that. They just, I think, don't understand the difference. You know what I'm saying? It seems like the Balling Engineering thing went from high to medium with just a couple feet, and the citizens were okay with that. So I just think I think that we should consider what is Centerville like and what is the makeup. And yeah, maybe there is some strong opposition to high density, and I feel comfortable putting that in there, but I don't feel comfortable limiting to such a degree that it is exclusionary. I think medium density is appropriate in a lot of areas, and if you look at even the first section, the Centerville Dual Creek Historic District, there's a lot of homes already in that district that are medium density. So it seems odd to me that we put in number 2, A2, that says no medium density residential development when there's already medium residential development. That seems odd to me.
You know, I had the same reaction with regards to the southeast residential area and the inclusion of no medium or high density
Right.
there. I mean, I too, I feel like you hear the word high density and it immediately just sets people on edge.
Right.
And it's almost a knee-jerk reaction to say, high density, nope, don't want it.
Right.
Right? But again, your Balling example I think is a really good one, and I think about this for this southeast residential area where you say it's primarily single-family residences. I mean, my house is on the street that's just right north of the Centerville Junior High School. Mm-hmm. I have a very nice house on 0.21 acres. You could not put my house in single-family zoning, right? And I don't think anyone would drive by my house and say, high density, right? And so I think my house is perfectly great sized, and I don't want a bigger yard, but I agree. So I am a little uncomfortable necessarily going across the board and saying no median density there either. I do think that people are at least willing to think about and can get on board with some medium density.
Well, and I think it's important for us to spell out what is high density. Because a lot of,
Well-
it is a knee-jerk reaction, and it can be used for political purposes, and
Yeah,
it,
Or to educate people.
And you
as
need to
it- 'cause
educate
we do
people.
define it. It's
Yeah, I just want to make
that-
sure you know the definition. The definition is 9 to 12 for high
I
density.
know the definition, I'm just
Okay,
saying
all right.
it's important that the definition is very,
But-
very
but-
obvious.
But my perception is Hafoka was seen as high density, and it's medium density. So I honestly agree with you. There is a perception of how things are applied. If you're 5 units an acre, so you're I live on a 9,000 square foot lot, so, it's single family. And I think if you had 9,000 square foot lots in single family, people don't perceive that as high density. But if you have a sixplex sitting on a piece of property, regardless of what the density is, that's high.
Right.
So, I heard a statement, and I hate to repeat it, but, renters don't wash their cars on the West Side plan. The perception is that if you're not a home ownership, you don't fully contribute to the dynamics and diversity of the community. I'm uncomfortable when people feel that way because, to me, renters are all of us at one point in time, or we have a life crisis and become a renter again. So it's not about us washing the cars. It's about providing good design, good layouts, and understanding that a fourplex, even a fourplex dispersed throughout a community rather than concentrated, is actually a better density than concentrating all fourplexes on a single piece of property too. The hard part of zoning is that creativity that you can have on a corner of a collector and an arterial in a single family area. Allow a duplex on that corner lot. But then if we do that, the next person wants a duplex, and the next person wants a duplex, and we have these tight zoning boundaries to try to protect that. So, I agree with you. The medium density is when you have a R18 or R18, what was it? R110, that's a 10,000 square foot lot. Now you're close to the quarter acre. But if you're R18, which is a lot of our historic subdivisions, that's not low density according to the definitions. It's single family, which they're comfortable with, but it's more of like 5.5 units per acre. So I agree with you. Density is a matter of perception.
Well, and I will also say, and I've said this before, I live in North Centerville, but west of Main Street. And if you count up the multifamily housing that is northwest of Parish and Main Street, we have Pinea, we have Greenfields, we have the Twin Homes, we have a lot of multifamily, and yet I feel like a lot of the pressure that is felt in South Centerville is more of along the lines that it is a historic district. It is the old town site. It is when they had houses and they are tearing them down to create multifamily. Whereas in the north, these were just created and they weren't breaking down old houses or whatever. And so people, I think we're a little bit more comfortable with that happening. And I feel like that's actually fairly similar representation from the south as it is in the north. Maybe not northeast of Centerville, but I feel like there's this falsity that keeps going around that South Centerville has all the multifamily, and it doesn't. It actually doesn't. But I think we need to be able to address the concerns of South Centerville citizens and residents.
So I think part of the thing here, and Corey touches on this, nails it when he talks about that it's perception, right? And it is perception, really.
Right.
And so that's part of the thing with South Centerville, I think, is that it's some of this stuff, and we keep talking about Bowling Engineering, but it's a good example of this, and it feels like it's zoned medium. He had to go and pick up 10 feet from the church to make it fit, but it really does, in a lot of ways, feel like we're going to try and cram as many units as we possibly can into this area. And so the perception is that it's high. It feels high because it's not the same as the rest of the neighborhood. So some of the developments you're talking about, the Pinea and all that stuff, they were kind of built out that way. that is the neighborhood.
Right, exactly.
That is the neighborhood. and
It's
so
not changing the neighborhood from
Yeah.
what it was. So I think that's where there's that tension.
And so I think a lot of times what we hear from people, and I think the council perceives this as well, is that at least in the southeast area here, they want to see that neighborhood kind of stay the same.
Maintained.
Yeah, instead of changing the neighborhood.
Right.
And maybe, so that's why generally, I generally like the edits that are here. I had a few things to talk about with that, but I generally like that because it kind of gives that perception of, look, we have some medium here, that's fine. We'll do the medium, that's good there. We've got, it's all low over here, good, let's do low over here. And kind of maintain that feeling of, we're not gonna change things drastically. So what you see is what you get, type of a thing. So I generally liked what was here and felt that was a good way of representing, that's what we've got.
You know, I don't know that I had realized just how much multifamily housing was on the north end.
There's a lot.
I live on the south end. I hear what my south end neighbors are talking to me about, and I focus more on my south end because I don't drive through the north end as much. I was surprised when I saw these numbers that you ran comparing the southeast quadrant to the entire city to show that the southeast quadrant was, negative 17 on the difference, which is pretty close to the negative 18 we are citywide. And my thought was, well, then which quadrant is picking up the slack, right? And my natural assumption would be, well, it's all in the southwest corner, right? That's the side that's picking up the slack, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the north end is picking up some
You'll see some
more.
relative numbers in the northwest where the densities occur up to and beyond Chase Lane. The northeast is probably where
Most.
you have least amount of
Yeah.
housing differences.
Right.
And then we have the anomaly, the west side.
Well, and I will say too, just back to the Balling, it may have felt out of place and crammed in, but actually, what is the development just east of that?
Well, it's high, but
And then what is just south of it?
commercial.
And then, so to me, I actually felt like a medium in that area is very appropriate, not out of place at all, based on the surrounding area. So it may have felt out of place again because it was a change, and I think that's more of what the citizens are pushing back against, is the change that is occurring, not necessarily that 10 feet more makes it more comfortable for them.
Yeah, but we talked about this before with like the flag lot ordinance, and it's the perception again. The math says that flag lots totally fit as far as units per acre and stuff, but when you start putting a 35-foot tall house in what feels like your backyard, the perception is that it's density, right? The perception is holy smokes, I've got this monster in my backyard. So,
And change.
yeah, I mean, change, sure, but it's the perception of this crowding in on me, so.
Can I nitpick one thing, Corey? Sure. And that was, and I do really appreciate your revisions. I think that they're good, and I'm generally okay with them.
It was a
because I
limited
think-
amount of time I got to put into them.
Well, no, and I think
I'm open.
I think that you've done a good job of capturing what I've heard as well, in terms of what I think that the community would be comfortable with some exceptions. But you do say in section 12-480-2, in that very first furthermore sentence,
Uh-huh.
you say that multifamily development has become a dominant form of newer housing development. I don't know that I would agree that multifamily housing is a dominant form. I certainly think that it is, it's an increasing form. It's a popular form. I don't know that I love the word dominant there, because
Right.
I think that there is still an awful lot of single-family homes and duplexes and townhomes that are going into the South Davis area.
I think that's a debatable term. I'm looking at it from the infill tear-down standpoint. So that is the dominant form of multifamily, is to grab a piece of property, tear down and redo, or infill. But yeah, we can call it, the thing I'm trying to craft in that language is the justification that we want to put some brakes on and have the nexus of those breaks without, when we look at these other broader policies, that we have a reason. So I'm trying to capture that. How well, I agree, it's debatable.
I think that, yeah, I don't know, dominant, that word didn't really bother me too much, and I think it does go to speak to the trend these days, which is we're going to try and get absolutely as many units as we possibly can on this piece of land. If you think about some of the applications that we've seen recently, obviously Bowling Engineering, we're got to pick up extra land to make it work. Martha's Place, or whatever that's called now with the Morris's, that's, you know, it's zone medium, and we're putting pretty much as many as we can fit on there. The Ray subdivision was zoned low, but we're dividing that one up as much as we possibly can, to the point where we had to have a discussion about setbacks to make sure that the build pad area was going to even fit, because we're trying to pack it in. I think that is definitely the pressure is, let's slice it up as tight as we possibly can. And so it, you know, kind of, I think it portrays the feeling that we're getting these days, which is
But in
more and
all
more.
of those examples, that was infill. That was not necessarily, so I don't know, maybe.
Well, but all three of those are in this southeast neighborhood that we're talking about here. So I think that's also part of the thing, that this southeast neighborhood is subject to those types of pressures, and that's what we're seeing.
And I think that's a different statement than saying that housing development in the South Davis area, the dominant form is multifamily. I think that is I think that's absolutely true, that this area does have those pressures, but those pressures are infill, and that's the specific area, not the whole South Davis area and the dominant form.
Yeah, I think I could make amendments to readdress it, how it's laid out. Infill is the issue. I could figure out a reword to those edits and still.
The trend.
Trending is what I had replaced it with. You know, it's an interesting question though, because if we're seeing all of these market pressures, right, we're seeing the market pressure to put in the maximum number of housing, it suggests to us that there's a lot of interest in that type of housing, right? There's obviously a market for it. People are buying it. Owners have an interest in maximizing the value of their property. And it goes back to the, you know, do we want to just be exclusionary and say, we don't care about the market, we'll push it out to the other cities, and we're just going to protect our single-family homes? I mean, there is a tension there. I like Corey's suggestion a lot of looking at places where, I mean, I would prefer to spread out amongst the city rather than focus it into, you know, like one quadrant of the city. But I really like the idea of looking more towards the arteries, because I think that is a logical place to put some of those developments to transition between, you know, the medium to the low.
Right.
If I can just give you it's not a counter argument, but just trying to give a counter perspective. So as you think about the fullness of policy and so forth, one of the interesting discussions I've had is the Cove subdivision, just north of Porter and west of 400, 3-lot flag lot subdivision. That's created some, you know, obviously angst over time, and I've had several discussions. So I'll capture it this way, just as a balanced, not a balanced argument, but just a perception of the other side of the fence. As planning, we try to use zoning to preserve values, health, safety, welfare of the community. Those are all of those social allowable issues under the law. If we, you know, do it the right way, we can regulate land uses for it. But there's also the issue of property rights, and this is something from my perspective only, as I'm open to all kinds of disagreement, because everybody I talk to, at least 50% disagree with me. But it's the concept that when you buy some land, you've purchased an opportunity of a set of rights. Now, there's no guarantee until you go and secure those rights. So there's the subtle distinction. You bought, if it has only been approved for a single-family home, and on that lot, no matter what size, that's your right until you go and look at what the set of rights you can exercise with your property are in place, and then go exercise those. And until you do, they're subject to change. But the thing I find interesting, particularly on the flag lot issue, is this debate of property rights. We give a zoning district of 4 units an acre. Somebody has an eligibility of a large parcel to have 4 units, but are unable, for whatever historic reason, their own self-imposed problem to the way historic time developed a pattern, They are well below that district's opportunity. You know, the thing that I hear is, well, it wasn't zoned for it. And I just want to make a distinction between the zoning and the tools to implement the zoning. A large piece of property, through configuration, has the district ability to look at 4 units an acre. Its constraints, whatever it may be, toe of a slope, channel, obviously you're not guaranteed, but you have a right to at least go and secure the potential for 4 units an acre. What are the tools to do that? And the flag lot is one of those tools that gets this angst. Flag lot is that it's an opportunity to where historic time and patterns didn't allow to the 4 units an acre to get you to the 4 units an acre. You're right, it's an infill and it's a perception. That's all about true. But remember, that person sitting and owning that property has a large investment, and at some point in time, if they're zoned for 4 units an acre, they would like the tools to get as close as they can to that. And so a flag lot ordinance or traditional conventional subdividing or infill opportunities or small lot zoning and flexible lot line, these are all tools of infill to say, hey, you're an overly large piece of property, you're in a zone of 4 units an acre, you only have 1, you can have 3 more, but because of historic time you can't get there, so here's your infill tools to get to the zoning. So hopefully I make that clear, is that there is an element of the person holding and purchasing the property that their neighbor exercises 4 units an acre on a raw ground, and I'm talking about a relative neighbor, not next door neighbor, but the tools for yours, even though you're in the same zoning district, you're not provided the tools to exercise it. So keep that in mind as you think of the other side of, we're looking at it protecting surrounding property owners, but also remember the property owner themselves and what we need to do there and maybe not do.
You know, Corey, that was the next thing I was going to say, is one of the reasons why I do feel uncomfortable with limiting medium density is because of property rights, because we do have a goal and a mission as the Planning Commission to look at the social goals of our city and trying to maintain a healthy, viable city, but also we have a responsibility to respect property rights and to respect exactly what you just said, so I'm not going to say it again, but that type of thing I think needs to be considered as we go through this.
And I think it does, though. I think it, it discusses how there are different zones in whatever throughout this area, and it kind of mentions that would stay, and I think that is important as well. If it's already residential medium, we're going to leave it residential medium until the property owner asks to change, then we'll have a discussion about it. But we're not saying we're going to go through and wholesale change everything.
Well,
so.
except for 1A, they already are. Like I said, I mentioned that one. 1A2 says no medium, and that specific historic district already has lots of mediums. So to me, that feels like anyone that's living in that historic district that has enjoyed the rights of medium density are now going to be limited to not having that anymore. And I don't know the legal definition of like a taking or anything, but I feel like we can't, I feel like legislating too much makes government too powerful, and we need to allow some private rights.
Well, not to pick nits here, but in that 1A, First North, Fourth South, Main Street, Fourth East, there's no medium in that area.
Okay, so I'm confused about that. I was going to ask you this, Corey, because on our Centerville zoning map, the Centerville Dual Creek Historic District is marked by dark lines and dots, and that is what I've been looking at, and it actually shows going all the way to Parish Lane.
Yeah, this is where I said I don't think the label of Dual Creek is matching up with Old Town and matching up with the...
Oh.
This is where I think and it's the idea of, do we want to call it Old Town and then layer it on top of Dual Creek? Do we I mean, this is the whole discussion that the labeling and the area descriptions don't jive exactly together.
In my opinion, if the Dual Creek zoning is not identical with the Dual Creek Historic District, I think it creates too much confusion.
I agree.
And
I
I
agree.
would be inclined to call it something else to avoid that potential confusion.
I agree.
And
But-
that's what I'm hoping from you is, it's originally called Old Town Site.
I'm okay
We can
with that.
stick with that.
Well, and even that, though, if you look at 100 North Main Street, 100 North Main Street, all along Main Street, those are all medium,
Yeah, here.
right?
It's
Those
commercial,
pink?
commercial medium.
Oh, commercial medium, there you go.
Right here is
Never mind.
residential medium inside the Dual Creek District.
That's the old
Yeah, but that's not
town
the old
site
town
district.
site.
It's
Unless
also
you,
in the Old Town.
well,
Site.
unless
Yeah.
you consider the north side of the road old town site. So then there would be just the, what is
Two.
that? That's Nancy Smith and
Right.
neighbor, right?
Is multifamily currently allowed in the commercial?
In the Main Street commercial, the South Centerville Main Street plan allows an option for certain number of units, and they're generally in the medium density.
So
Allowed.
putting this in a medium would conflict with that, right?
Well, the medium would be to the pink. This medium is different. This is a residential medium district.
Right.
This is a commercial mixed use with residential district.
So can I throw out a really just off-the-wall idea?
Yes, please.
Going back to this label of people being concerned about the label high density. I mean, right now, we have our density designations jumping by 4 units, right? 4 doubling to 8, doubling, well, not quite doubling, right, to 12, which are fairly, I mean, if you're looking at a really big piece of land, I don't think it's necessarily as impactful as when you're looking at these smaller pieces like the Balling Engineering, right? And that's where what Kevin is saying is that it feels really squishy, that it feels like it doesn't really fit that area. Have you ever seen cities or municipalities break down their zoning code even more? So instead of just doing low, medium, high, to break it down and call, 1 through 3 super low, and 4 through 6 low, and do you know what I mean? To give
Yeah.
it a little bit so that it's not, so you're not jumping quite so much from
Yeah,
low to
I mean,
medium,
there's
medium to high.
3 really quick off the top ways of approaching it. Just fix those ranges and use the same labels. We've talked about that a little bit. Break them down further. Or you relabel, an example I've seen is if you go to Ogden and in the inner city area, they have like an R2 EC, East Central. So just making up Dual Creek, it could be, the residential medium could be RM Dual Creek, just for fun, DC. And that's a whole different density based on that neighborhood dynamics. So you would, in the general plan, say, set that up, and then go back to the zoning and change and implement.
I know that this is like way more outside of what we were supposed to look at, but we're struggling so much with the difference between these different densities, and it does strike me that maybe that's just because our densities jump by so much.
Well, I think maybe you could do, another approach could be something along the lines of low would be up to 3, and then conditional would be another 2, and then, medium would be up to 6, and conditional's another 2, or something, I don't know. And
I thought we heard pretty strongly from city council that they don't like conditional.
Yeah, they don't.
Well,
have
that's probably true, but,
Well, you just top end, don't go a range, just top end, this, and that.
I mean, you have to think of it in terms of if it's conditional up to 8, then it's 8,
Right, that's what I'm saying.
so.
I know I have roamed far afield, and I also know that this matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so let me go ahead and to take care of some procedural business. Let's go ahead and open the matter for public hearing.
Corey scared him away.
Seeing no one rush forward to comment, I'll close the public hearing. And do we have any further discussion?
There we go. I had another thought too. I wasn't around when the Centerville Commons was created, but I also want to use that sort of as an example that that is not low density, but it is a very desirable place for a lot of different types of families to live. And I just worry that if we completely negate medium density, I really have a concern for the vitality of our city. I feel like it's not thinking forward in a way that protects what we have and looks to the future, which is kind of what I think our goal is.
Well, again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Centerville Commons, I mean, that is the whole neighborhood. And that really, it really works because that
Was first.
it's there. Yeah. But there's really not any other vacant land unless you were to start to tear down like what was Dick's on Pages Lane and try to do residential there and make that the neighborhood. But there's not really any large pieces of land left to do something like that.
What about on the far east side, up the mountain way? I mean, you said that it's all, right, that it's all single family up that direction. There's not
There's
really.
some larger lots. I mean, they're not like, they couldn't do a PUD there.
Here's some high density, we just don't measure it.
That's
Very, very high. It's double deep in some areas.
It's a very, I won't say anything. Okay.
No, but, well, speaking of the east, all the blue up there on the east, I thought one of the things that I wanted to mention was maybe this would be an opportunity also to talk about what our vision for that big chunk of blue is for development or not. Because technically that would fall under the southeast neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think that's something, I mean, you can throw out some brainstorming ideas now, but I think that's something that we can also have in the second half reviewed also. So I don't want to prohibit you from now, because that's public facilities, but yeah, I think we should, it's very appropriate now that you're amending the plan to have a discussion. I think about Pages, about Main Street, this could be one of the areas.
Well, I mean, I think part of the reason why I bring that up now is that I think it's highly unlikely that you would do anything commercial or anything other than residential up there. And so, since we're talking about the residential vision for the southeast neighborhood, this would be a good opportunity to say what's our vision for that vis-a-vis residential, which is what its most likely development would be. And I would propose that it would not be developed for residential, as it is kind of, it is a last area that feels like you are out of the city, but you're.
Yeah, so what you're saying is add a new section, a new sub-district of this area about that large upper parcels.
Sure. Or,
The
yeah,
Mountain District.
the Mountain District.
I kind of don't want to touch that.
You just don't want to even open that Pandora's box?
I kind of think,
I had a thought about that without opening that whole thing, is that when we talk about the southeast residential area on E, one of the bullet points would be to say something along the lines of no new residential development shall be allowed east of existing residential zones along Island View Drive, Sunrise Circle, and Ridgeline Circle.
That's something you could add into it, yeah, definitely.
So it kind of fits it in with the existing neighborhood southeast area and says, okay, everything east of those streets that's already established as residential, we don't want to see anything else up there. So you're not opening up a whole new zone and a whole new discussion, but kind of working it into what's already existing.
Don't we have our foothills master plan that might
Yeah.
govern this area?
I
does.
feel like even touching that opens it up for movement down the road towards development. And I feel like personally, I support our foothills management plan, and the majority of the people that I know do too in Centerville, and I feel like touching that would lead to development. So I don't like that idea.
I have concerns with opening that Pandora's box as well.
That's my very honest opinion.
Well, I mean, so how strongly do people feel in terms of tweaking the language that Corey has? Does everyone feel prepared to make recommended changes? Would you like to go home and think about the language based on the discussion that we've had today and then come back?
If you would
and
like,
give-
I could create a second draft of some of the ideas I've heard here, whether you agree with them or not, it's not the push. I could go in and tweak what I've heard from the discussion and have two ideas, improve this one, obviously, and then create a separate one that talks about some of the issues that you can strike in and strike out.
I actually like that idea a lot. I feel like we've had a good discussion tonight, but there are definitely a few things in here that I think that we would want to change.
Yeah, well, let me, if you're okay, let me take this discussion, some of the things I've heard, and I'll write them or glue them in or do something different so that you can see a commentary along the side to show how it would be structured and added or subtracted so that everybody gets their ideas on the table, and then your motion can line item through.
I wouldn't even mind seeing if there were areas where we maybe had some disagreement too, like for example, the medium versus the low only on the,
Yes.
what we'll now call the Old Town Site section. Like, I would like to see two different, okay, you could either do alternate A or alternate B.
Yeah,
so
I'll
that-
write it in and give the or
Right.
this or that or whatever, so that you have the document to work with.
I have a question. Is the town site definitely considered bounded by those, that it does not fit up with what is zoned? The 100 north, 400
The town
south?
site directives here were not edited, so as far as the boundary lines, those are the original boundary lines, 100 north, 400 south.
I would also just maybe add that as a possibility of considering making that match up more with what we have currently. It makes sense to me that if we have a whole,
But remember, there's general plan, which is the vision and the desire of the future, and then there's the zoning. And I do think that it creates confusion if you have a general plan area named the same thing as
Okay.
your zoning overlay. And in addition, if you did try to match those up, then you're going to have an overlay between the historic district area, then you've got an overlap with the elementary area, which goes all the way to Parish.
right, okay, yeah.
So I think the
changing
better
the
approach
name
would
is
be to
just
go
that.
back to a different name or the old name, and then
Okay.
just reference and say, this area is
The
within
south, yeah.
the Centerville Historic District, see zoning 1249, with a lot of things that we've already done in that area might be
Yeah.
helpful.
I like
Yeah,
that idea.
that's no problem.
Because otherwise, you're gonna have to be doing
That's right,
changes to these other areas.
right, that's right, you're right.
Which you may also want to look at, because it seems those boundaries are a little fuzzy between
Wonky.
the areas, but.
It was the struggle of trying to not recognize somehow that the Dual Creek District is a part of this area. So I can reformat it, go back to the old and figure out how to format.
Yeah, still
That
recognizing
acknowledge-
that
And I think
most of this
recognizing
area
it
is
is
governed
important.
by that historic district, and
Yeah.
that's really important, and don't forget to look at those
But
zones.
if I didn't mention Dual Creek Historic District, I was afraid I was going to get hung from the rafters.
Can I mention one thing, maybe? This is something that I thought about as I read through this, and I made some notes here about this. And this, we can discuss this and direct Corey or not to include this in his revisions. As we were talking about the Bowling Engineering property, there was a discussion about a line that was in the Pages Lane Commercial District, specifically the Taylor Elementary thing. And there was a discussion about whether or not that applied in this case, because we were talking about residential, but this was found in the Pages Lane Commercial District thing. And so I would actually propose that in the Centerville Elementary area, and then also in the southeast residential area, because there is no Taylor Elementary area, that we do kind of call that out specifically. And this is, I wrote down some language. So for example, Centerville Elementary area, B, and then 2, leave all of that 2 that's on there, and at the very end of that, you would add, any development in this area shall be designed and developed for minimal impact upon the school. Uses that may have detrimental impact upon the school should not be allowed. And I think, and then basically repeat the exact same thing in the southeast residential area.
But call out
But
Taylor.
call out Taylor Elementary.
Yeah.
So that we could be really clear that yeah, it was in the commercial area, and we meant it for commercial, but we do also mean it for residential, and we mean it for both of the elementary schools that are in this area. The junior high, we could debate whether that would apply to the junior high. It's a different type of a thing with junior high versus the elementary schools, but I think especially the two elementary schools, it would be nice to be able to say, yes, we really do want to be careful what we do around these elementary schools because they can be sensitive, so.
Great suggestion in
I
my
like
mind.
that. Do you feel like you have what you need from us, Corey, to go back?
I
and
think
take a
so.
Can I
stab?
ask just one last thing?
I think
Can you
so.
tell me about the strikeout on the Centerville Junior High area, C2?
It said the area south of Riviera Townhomes be considered for medium or low density. We ended up with the courtyard.
It's already developed.
It's already
So you're
developed.
just taking that out?
So to me, the policy was setting the future of where the courtyard is, and
Okay.
that future took place.
Well, we had a great discussion tonight.
Oh, I thought it was excellent. I'm glad, because I took about just a day and a half to quickly do these edits and put them out, so I knew they weren't perfect.
Well, I'm really impressed. I thought that for a day and a half, I thought that you've done a bang-up job there, Corey.
Yep, I agree.
All right.
Do we need to make a motion to table this issue, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would move to table this issue.
And direct staff to make
And
some revisions.
Direct staff to make revisions consistent with the discussion that we've had tonight.
Yep.
Second that.
second.
No.
Do I need to go through and do a individual one, or am I okay saying all in favor?
It's a table,
All
so
in
all in
favor.
favor.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, and I believe that the last thing that we have on our agenda tonight is the Community Development Director's Report. I'll turn it back over to Corey.
Well, if you're trying to hit the Caribbean late in the winter season, let us know, because we have a meeting scheduled for you. We have some items that are ready. I'm attempting to bring back the accessory building setbacks. I've gone through the ratios and reviews, and you ought to see the whiteboard. I got told today that it looks like a mad scientist whiteboard. And so it was interesting to study that issue, so I'm hoping to come back with some ideas, and then you can debate them and see if we move forward or not, or go back and retry. It is very difficult. I had, Lisa called me today to talk about the issue and reconfirm my mad scientist board. I wish it was easy, but given all the policy whatever that word is,
Implications, yes.
we have to do that.
Not in the minutes.
And use the cheat word in the minutes. Cheetos Johnson, to let you know, we were in the middle of the process of writing the reports, discussing them, the pros and cons, and their ultimate decision is they'd like to withhold that from your review tonight, which you did. They would like to bring back a rezone application along with their conceptual subdivision and see how that plays it. So the rezone policy would be established first, because that would be the determining factor on how the project would proceed or not proceed second. So that's something that they're willing to do, and I think we have one more application that came in. Seems like it was a conditional use. Why am I forgetting it? But we have an agenda.
And then the subdivision ordinance.
Oh, yes, Lisa's.
They're just minor amendments. We're not bringing you the substantial amendments that we're working with the consultant, but this is just to get our municipal code online.
Hey, Corey, did for the York Automotive, did the fire marshal do their review, and
They didn't, and we had to get the applicant to call them to move off of, they were so busy with 6 cities that they spaced it, and said that, I was told they'd get back to you, Corey, and again, Amanda's great. She just has 6 cities as a fire inspector to govern, so York has contacted them, and they're going to visit the site
okay.
this week.
I was just wondering if we'd known if that was coming back to us or not.
Haven't heard.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for our fabulous staff. I think
Fabulous commission.
no more further business. I will move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. And I had to do the gavel.
Love it.
We're adjourned.
What's the rezone request? Are they going from
Thanks for your work.
RL?
Yeah.
I mean, they leave me a gavel here. What am I supposed to do?
You have to use it. I think it's the
Calling
rule.
for me.